I've been a groundskeeper at the same city cemetery for about 15 years. It's not as spooky a job as you'd think. Honestly, most days it's peaceful. You're just mowing lawns, trimming hedges, and making sure the place looks respectable. You get to know the layout like the back of your hand. The names on the stones become familiar neighbors you never met. It's a quiet life. One of the regular tasks, especially in the older sections, is dealing with sinkers. That's what we call it when the ground over a grave settles over time, creating a noticeable depression in the lawn. It's a natural process, the coffin and earth shifting below. My job is to bring in a wheelbarrow of topsoil and fill it in, level it out, and throw some grass seed on top. It's routine. This happened late one afternoon in November, maybe around 4 o'clock. The sun was already sinking below the tree line, casting these long, distorted shadows that stretched across the lawns. The air had that cold metallic bite to it, and you could feel the temperature dropping fast. I was just trying to get this one last job done before calling it a day. I was working in the oldest part of the cemetery, a section from the late 1800s where most of the graves were forgotten. No visitors to leave flowers anymore. I found a pretty significant sinker over a small, unassuming headstone, the name worn smooth by a century of rain and wind. I went and got my first wheelbarrow of dirt and dumped it in. The thing is, the dirt just swallowed it. A full barrow should have been more than enough, but the depression looked almost exactly the same. I figured it must have been a deeper sinker than I thought. Maybe the coffin had finally collapsed completely. I sighed. It just meant more work. I went back to the soil pile, loaded up a second, heavier barrow, and wheeled it back. As I got closer to the grave, I noticed two things. First, the depression looked even deeper than when I had left, as if the earth was actively being compacted from below. Second, there was a smell. It wasn't the usual smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. It was a faint, sickly sweet and chemical smell, almost like old, cheap perfume mixed with formaldehyde. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. I'm a pretty logical guy. I told myself it was just my imagination. Maybe a skunk had sprayed nearby or something. I tipped the second wheelbarrow, ready to just get the job done and move on. As the soil began to pour into the hole, a sound came from inside the grave. It wasn't a scream or a moan. It was a soft, distinct sigh. A long, slow exhalation, like someone who had been holding their breath for a very, very long time, was finally letting it out. The sound was muffled by the earth, but it was unmistakably there. It came from right beneath my feet. I dropped the wheelbarrow. It clattered on the gravel path, the sound echoing in the dead quiet of the cemetery. I didn't look into the hole. I didn't want to see what was there. I grabbed my shovel and, in a blind panic, started frantically throwing the remaining dirt from the pile into the depression, not even looking, just scooping and throwing until it was level. I packed up my tools, practically threw them in the utility truck, and got out of there. I told my boss I finished early and went home. The next day, I forced myself to walk back to that spot. The ground was perfectly flat. The grass seed I'd thrown was scattered on top. There was no smell. There was no sign that anything had happened. I still work at this place. I still fill the sinkers, but now, every time I approach one, I stop. I listen. And I can't shake the feeling that the peace I once found in that silence was just a misunderstanding of what it means to be truly quiet. I'm a junior in a small Midwest college, studying digital media. What that really means is I spend most nights hunched over a laptop, trimming clips and fighting deadlines. My partner for the big semester project, let's just call her Kay, said we should film inside the old cemetery on the edge of town. The rule for the class was simple: 5-minute film, only moonlight for lighting. She swore the white stone there would glow like stage lights. I agreed because I needed the grade. We went on April 12th, the first full moon of spring. It was about 58 degrees, yet our breath still showed like it does in winter. Kay set her tripod beside a tall, square tomb that looked more like a mini bank vault than a grave. While she leveled the camera, I focused on a nearby headstone. The screen flashed, and the battery icon turned empty even though we charged everything an hour earlier. Kay swapped batteries, but the same thing happened again. She muttered something about the place killing our gear. I walked off to grab extra shots, kneeling by an angel statue. I noticed the grass around the stone was pressed down in a neat circle, as if someone had slept there. The air had that metal smell you get before lightning. I filmed anyway and tried not to think too hard. When I got back, Kay was replaying what we had. She pointed at the screen. On every clip, the counter jumped forward, slipped back a second, then stuck for a beat, like the night itself was skipping. I told her we should pack up. She insisted on one last shot, an easy slide down the main lane. We laid the little track on the asphalt, hit record, and pushed. Halfway through, something pale and small darted across the frame. Kay gasped. I turned. The lane was empty, but I could hear a swing creak in the playground just outside the fence. That set had been ripped out last fall after some accident, so the noise had no reason to be there. We broke our own rule and checked the clip right there on the spot. The blur cleared into the shape of a boy, maybe 7 or 8, dressed in what looked like a white church suit. His hands were folded like he was praying, and his eyes were just black holes. No whites, no shine, only darkness. Kay started breathing too fast, almost sobbing. We threw the gear into the hatchback and peeled onto the road. In the rearview mirror, I saw the cemetery gate shrinking behind us. Then the same boy standing in the middle of the road, hands still folded, moonlight passing clean through him as if he were made of glass. Back at the dorm, Kay dropped the files onto her laptop. The boy was gone from every frame, where he should have been. The soundtrack spiked with a dry whisper saying, "Overexposed." The word played 10 times, sometimes forward, sometimes backward. We deleted the clips, emptied the trash, even unplugged the drive. We ended up turning in a simple slide deck that said we lost our footage. The professor gave us a low passing grade and said the lesson was about pushing through setbacks. I am Uber driver, and I drive on nights because my daytime job barely covers rent and gas. And one Tuesday near the end of May, I was on my way to pick up a fare on the far side of town, and the GPS took me past the old cemetery that sits between 2 cornfields just outside the city limits. I have lived here since I was a kid, and that place has always felt off to me. The iron gate is bent and the name over the arch is so rusted you can't read the last letters, and no streetlights reach the gravel road that runs along the front fence. My phone buzzed that short little tone it makes when the rider is waiting, and it said I was 5 minutes out. And right then the whole car gave a hard jerk like I had hit a pothole, only the road was flat. The headlights blinked twice and the engine quit on me, so I coasted to a stop right in front of the gate, the hood pointing straight at the graves. I turned the key once, twice, 3 times, only got a dull click. And I was mumbling at the steering wheel when I heard a kid laugh somewhere close. The window was open a crack and the sound drifted in soft and quick, like somebody about 6 years old. Maybe a boy, maybe a girl, hard to tell, but it was definitely coming from inside the cemetery just a little way past the fence. First thing I thought was some teenager messing around. Second was maybe a real kid stuck in there after dark. So I grabbed my phone, flipped on the light and pushed the gate open. It made this long squeal like an old screen door, and the gravel popped under my shoes. The air felt thick like rain even though the sky was clear. I said real calm, "Hey, are you okay in there? Need some help?" And I waited, but all I got back was another little giggle, only this time it came from my right. I walked that way past a row of flat stones, and the ground sloped down. My right foot sank into soft dirt up to the ankle. I tried to pull free, but something tightened around my leg. It felt exactly like a cold hand, fingers on my calf, thumb on my shin, squeezing hard. I aimed the phone light down, but there was nothing except black dirt and a few weeds, and the laugh turned into a whisper right beside my ear. One word, stay. And every part of me locked up, except my heart, which was banging so loud I could hear it in my head. I yanked again. The shoe slipped out and I almost fell backward, but I got loose, like whatever had me just let go. I didn't look back. I limped to the car, jumped in and hit the key. The engine coughed, died, did it again, same thing. Third try it caught, and the headlights snapped on and swept over the first row of stones. And in that light, I saw a small shape standing beside the tracks. My front tires had cut into the gravel. White dress or maybe a long shirt. Could have been a boy, could have been a girl. The face was blurry like fog over glass. I slammed the shifter into drive, spun gravel all over the fenders and got back on the road. My phone kept dinging, the app asking why I hadn't reached my rider. I just tapped car trouble and went offline for the night. Next morning I took the car to the shop. The guy ran his tests. Battery good, starter good, nothing wrong at all. He did scrape off a little dried mud from inside the right rear wheel well, and held it up and laughed. Said looks like a kid put their hand there. 5 little prints clear as day. And I nodded like it was funny. But I couldn't make myself laugh back. I tell myself that mud was already there, and maybe the car just picked a bad place to stall. But every time I drive past that gate now, I keep my windows rolled all the way up, and I stare straight ahead, and I pray the ride request never sends me that way again. My name is Tyler, and I'm a lean, almost bony guy. My mom calls me coat hanger shoulders. It matters because of what happened later. My 3 friends, names changed here, are Gabe, Nolan, and Jasmine. Gabe is the opposite of me. Gym every morning, thick arms that can lift a keg like a cardboard box. You'll need that picture in your head. Friday, October 14th, 2022. The 4 of us were headed to a new club on the east side. Cover charge jumped at 10 o'clock, so Gabe suggested a 5-minute shortcut through the big city cemetery. Google Maps showed a path that crossed straight to the river road. I'd only seen the place from a bus window. Brick wall, iron gate, no lights inside. But I let the group talk me into it. We reached the side gate at 9:32 p.m. I kept checking my phone because I was nervous. Downtown glow barely reached the graves. Our phone lights made tight cones on the asphalt. Inside, the air felt still, like someone had pressed pause on the night. Maybe 40 yards in, we heard metal scrape against stone, a hard, dry, wrenching sound. Gabe muttered that it was probably a caretaker. We rounded a bend and froze. A thin man, taller than Gabe but built like me, stood by a fresh grave, welding mask flipped down, both hands around a crowbar. He popped something off the headstone, dropped it into a rusty wheelbarrow, then looked up. He pushed the mask back. Even in bad light, I caught the shine in his wide eyes and the twitch at the corner of his mouth. No caretaker vibes, just wrong. Nolan lifted his phone to film. The glow lit our faces for half a second. That was enough. The man smiled slow, like a zipper opening. "Night stroll?" he asked, voice rough, almost amused. "We're just cutting through," Jasmine said, stepping behind Gabe's shoulder. Nobody answered. The man planted his crowbar in the dirt, gripped the wheelbarrow, and lunged forward without warning. Metal inside clanged like loose pans. Instinct took over. We scattered. I dashed behind a stone angel. Breath sharp in my chest. Boots pounded past me. His, not my friend's. I peeked around the statue and saw him swing the crowbar through empty air where Nolan had been. He turned my way. The weld mask glinted as he tilted his head, listening. I pressed flat against the cold stone, praying I was thin enough to disappear. A shout cracked the silence. Gabe, deeper than normal. "Ty, run!" I looked up and saw the psycho sprinting toward Gabe and Jasmine. Gabe planted himself between them like a wall. But one whistle of the crowbar changed his mind. He grabbed me by the collar as I stepped out, flung me over his shoulder fireman stylers, and bolted. I remember the head rush of being upside down, cemetery lanes whipping past, Jasmine's flashlight bouncing wild, and that scraping metal fading behind us. We blew through the gate across the sidewalk and didn't slow down until city streetlights colored the pavement orange. Gabe set me on my feet. My legs shook so hard I almost tipped over. Jasmine kept watch behind us. Nobody followed. For 10 minutes we just breathed. I pulled my phone. 9:51 p.m. Only 19 minutes had passed since we entered, but it felt like an hour. We walked the long way to the club and never went in. Instead, we sat in a bright 24-hour diner until morning traffic started. None of us wanted to risk the dark streets home. When the sun finally rose, Gabe rolled his shoulders like they ached and joked that being the designated tank wasn't on his weekend plan. Nobody laughed. I never learned who that man was or why he was ripping metal off a grave. Police might have theories. I never filed a report. What would I say that a stranger with a welding mask tried to harvest headstones and chase us for sport? 3 months later, I passed the cemetery on a bus at noon. Fresh bronze still gleamed on the grave where we saw him. No scratches, no wheelbarrow marks. Like the night had been wiped clean. I tightened my hoodie around my skinny shoulders and kept my eyes forward until the wall was out of sight. This was October 2017, and I still can't drive past the old cemetery near Millbrook without feeling like I'm going to throw up because of what happened that night when me and 3 friends made the stupidest decision of our lives. Connor had been going on for weeks about how his older brother went there in high school and saw weird stuff, and after drinking in Jess's basement all night, we somehow thought checking out a cemetery at 1 a.m. was a good idea, even though Jess kept saying we were idiots, but came anyway, and Noah was already recording everything on his phone, talking about making it into a video for his YouTube channel that nobody watched. The cemetery near Millbrook is ancient, like 1800s old, with those huge iron gates and mausoleums that look like tiny castles, and it sits way back on this dirt road where there's no lights, and the nearest house is probably a mile away. So already we should have known better. Connor parked his piece of shit Honda on the shoulder about 100 yards from the entrance, because we knew security might check the main parking area. And there's this known gap in the fence on the north side, where generations of kids have snuck through. So we squeezed in one by one, with Jess complaining the whole time about ruining her new jacket on the rusty fence. Noah had his phone flashlight going, and Connor brought this huge flashlight from his dad's garage, and we were trying to find the oldest section, where supposedly there's all these graves from the 1820s, which probably half the stories about them are bullshit. But we were already there, so whatever. We'd been walking around for maybe 20 minutes, just reading headstones and Noah filming everything, when we heard a car door slam from over by the maintenance shed, which should have been completely empty at 1:30 in the morning. And Connor immediately killed his flashlight, and we all ducked behind this big angel statue, trying not to even breathe. That's when we saw him. This guy in dirty coveralls, pushing a wheelbarrow with an old lantern hanging off the front, like something from another century. And the way he was struggling with it meant whatever was in there was heavy as hell. When he passed under the moonlight between the trees, I could see there was something wrapped in a blue tarp in that wheelbarrow. Something that was definitely the size and shape of a body. But Noah swears he didn't catch that on video, so maybe the light was playing tricks. But I know what I saw, and it made my whole body go cold. We stayed frozen watching him push that wheelbarrow toward the newer section, where people still get buried today. And once he was far enough away, Connor whispered we should get the hell out of there. But when we turned around, there was another man standing maybe 15 feet from us, in the same dirty coveralls, holding a shovel, and just watching us. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there gripping that shovel. And then in this totally calm voice he said, "Cemeteries closed." but the way his knuckles were white on that shovel handle made it clear we had a serious problem. Connor tried to explain we were just leaving, but the guy cut him off and said we needed to come with him to the office to fill out trespassing paperwork before we could go, and something about his tone made it clear saying no wasn't an option. He walked behind us, herding us toward the maintenance building instead of back to the fence, and Jess grabbed my hand so tight I thought she'd break my fingers. And when we got close to the building, the guy with the wheelbarrow was coming back empty now, and they exchanged this look that made my stomach drop. The first guy suddenly swung the shovel at Connor's head, and Connor barely ducked in time. And that's when we just ran in 4 different directions, through the headstones. I could hear footsteps pounding behind me, and the shovel hitting monuments as I passed them, throwing sparks. And I've never run that fast in my life before or since. I hit the fence at full speed and tore my whole shirt getting through that gap, and could hear Jess screaming somewhere behind me. But I couldn't stop, and when I got to Connor's car, the others were already there, and Connor was starting it before I even got the door closed. We drove out of there so fast Connor almost rolled the car on the first turn, and nobody said anything until we got back to town. And even now, 8 years later, we've never talked about what those guys were burying that night, or why they were so desperate to make sure we didn't leave that cemetery as witnesses.